You can dig yourself out of any hole. You just have to sit down and put in the work. It might take you 2 years, it may take you 4 years, but you can come up with the plan.
People that you work with, have they ever stopped to think about what life is like after the retirement age?
I think for our generation, millennials shouldn't feel alone. Everybody else is already thinking about retirement. Nobody's thinking about retirement. Believe me, when I'm sitting across the table from them, they're not thinking about retirement. And that's okay.
But if you're in a position where you can now max out your 401k, 20 years of $20,000, how much is that?
If I'm 35 years old, I'm saving for 20 years, and I'm earning a 7% rate of return, that's $819,909.
You may not think that you're saving money for retirement because you're not taking X amount and putting in a 401k, but by you paying off that debt, that's interest that you're not paying anymore. Once those debts are paid off, now that money that you're not paying towards credit cards anymore, now you can start putting money away into a 401k.
You have a plan. When it just gives you more purpose. Once you're at this point where you start saying to yourself, where do I go from here? Is there something better that I could be doing with my money? I think that's a good place to be.
I'm excited about today's episode because I get to continue with the theme of finance that I started on the last episode that I had with John Lane. So today I have with me somebody who I've been trying to get on the show for a while, and like John, we were able to make it happen finally. More information for you, my listeners and subscribers, to digest when it comes to finances. How to save money, investing, what does that look like, especially for the millennials, because a lot of us, it can be difficult to think about what retirement is, what it looks like, and frankly, how much money we're supposed to save. But without further ado, I want to introduce my next guest, Miguel Delgado, who is a wealth manager with Peak 360 Wealth Management based here in the Bay Area. He's got a wealth of knowledge and experience and really focusing on how to help you manage your money. So without further ado, Miguel, thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me on the show. Really excited. I've listened to a couple of your episodes. I think the messaging that people have here to talk about is really important. My background is a bit different from most advisors. We were just talking about this a little bit before the show, that a lot of advisors that I know of come from economics background. They started businesses when they were young. They've kind of always been on this track. My background's a little bit different. So I was born in Mexico. A lot of people don't know that, but I came here when I was 9 months old. So I don't really know anything different. But was very much raised in a Catholic Mexican culture. Both my parents worked blue-collar jobs, and my mother cleaned houses for a living. My dad worked odd jobs in the beginning, being a handyman, literally crushing cans and delivering them on the weekends, whatever you could put food on the table, right? Mm-hmm. And construction and all that stuff. And growing up, I was a normal kid. I had really good parents who loved me, and somewhere around the teenage years, I started realizing, I really started getting passionate about music, of all things. So that was sort of like my first career. I started playing music for the church, started teaching music. Very early on in my life, I learned that I was really good at working with people, and I never knew exactly what I was going to end up doing. I thought when I graduated high school, I might end up just going into construction like my dad. In all honesty, I never really even intended on going to college. I wanted to go straight from high school, construction, start making some money, buy the house, buy the car, get married, have kids, live the American life for somebody who, came from Mexico and all that. But a lot of things changed. I got very lucky throughout my life where I had a lot of good mentors that kind of steered me in the right direction. Like I said, I started off with music, realized, I'm probably not going to make a lot of money doing this. But the real story is between the years of 2001 and 2008. So my parents got a lot of advice from different kinds of people that they trusted. Mm-hmm. People who, my parents were the godparents of somebody else's children, people like that, right? And long story short, my parents were one of many who bought a house, lost everything during the recession back in 2008. I mean, they lost everything. My dad lost his job. They lost their dream house. Their practically almost all their savings, just getting bad advice after bad advice. And those are really emotional times for me. So they really kind of shaped who I am. Now, during my journey in college, I was working full time in financial services. but I thought I wanted to be an attorney so I could stand up for people and make sure that this never happens to anybody again. But the short story basically is I found out what a certified financial planner was, and I thought, wow, I never knew these people existed. I didn't know there was people who were out there who dedicated their lives to really just making sure people make good decisions with their money. And that's kind of what I wanted to do. And fast forward about 12 years later, here I am.
That's an awesome story. And in the time that I've known you, I never actually asked you about the whole backstory there. It's amazing how much you can learn about somebody just actually saying, hey, how did you get into the career that you're actually doing now? That's incredible. So when you were talking about your parents, when you say they were sort of giving bad advice, I'm guessing it was like maybe the wrong type of home mortgage that was being put out there, or maybe invest in this and you're going to make so much money. What have been some of the things, if you want to get specific about it, that they actually sort of fell victim to? Because I'm sure they weren't alone in that time frame.
Yeah, I actually did a study on this in college. It was one of my the papers that I wrote when I was a senior. The Latino market was the people who got hit the hardest during the recession, and that was mainly because the majority of their assets were tied to the house or cash.
Yeah,
and that was it. And so, they did fall victim to predatory lending. They got the bad types of loans that they shouldn't have gotten, bought a bigger house that they probably shouldn't have bought, that type of thing. But it was also lack of advice. They didn't have financial advisors. They had people who knew about taxes. They had people who knew about insurance, and they had their own self-interests, right? And so they were, maybe they had good intentions, but it wasn't the right fit for my parents. They weren't being guided based off of my parents' unique situation. And so not getting the right advice, not learning about all the things that they should be doing kind of led them to that. And I think a lot of other people.
Jeez. And so when you were experiencing this, you were how old? You were probably in your late teens, correct?
Yeah, I was between 18 and 22.
Geez. So when you're seeing this in real time, just, not just your parents, but everybody, it seems, around us, either they were losing jobs or losing homes or the money just drained away. And yeah, that 2007, 2008 period, it was really like, wow, this is a real thing. Like, these companies could actually go out of business. These people are losing their homes because, like you said, predatory lending. Here's your minimum payment, but then we're not going to tell you conveniently in the nicest way that when your teaser rate expires, your mortgage is going to shoot up maybe 50, 100% or even more than that. And now you're on the hook for that. And it really, like, going through that, I have a similar thing where it really puts it into perspective how money works, or how you think it was supposed to work based on how you grew up. Like, if you just save all this money, then you're going to be fine in retirement. And that's kind of the way it used to work. It was, our grandparents' generation was just save because of how they grew up and what they knew. And at the time, savings rates were different. You could actually probably just save money and actually probably be okay going forward. But nowadays, especially at the last during the pandemic, when savings rates were pretty much nothing, you can't just save anymore. You have to be smarter with your money. You have to learn how to invest or put it away somewhere. So as you were going through college and you were learning what a certified financial planner was, how did that shape your mindset in terms of how you can take what you're learning here and sort of give it back to everybody else who doesn't know about finances?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. When I started, my wife, we joke about how I could be very idealistic, but I think that's a good thing. I lean into that sometimes. And when I got into the business, the main purpose was to be able to help people like my parents, right? And so here I am, 25 years old, starting in a financial planning practice just from scratch, right? No clients, no W-2 salary, just I gotta build from nothing. Yeah. And I started hitting up my community. I grew up in Hayward, just like you. That's my, I'm what they call made in Hayward, right? And so I went back to that community and I offered my services. I tried explaining what I had to offer. And then I realized not too long after the services that I had to offer weren't that helpful for that community at that point, because here I am, somebody that can help people save and invest, but I'm talking to people who were still probably living paycheck to paycheck, right? It was difficult for them to transition from, covering their basic needs to, I got like $1,000, $2,000 a month left over. What should I do with that, right? It wasn't those kinds of conversations. So I had to transition to really help a different type of clientele. But fortunately, now I'm at a point in my life where I could do things like this, right?
Yeah.
This is kind of my way of giving back. I've co-authored some books that speak to this, right, to help that type of community. So that's kind of where I'm at now.
Gotcha. So when you're first talking to people about their finances, how do you introduce yourself? Does somebody find you? Do you have to advertise? Like, how do you start getting the message out there in terms of what actually a financial planner is? Or if you want to explain your version of how that definition works, what is a financial planner specifically? What do they do for people?
Yeah, so, it's really confusing for a lot of folks, and I don't blame them, because if you Google financial advisor, you'll get financial planner, wealth manager, financial advisor, investment advisor, insurance.
They're all different, right?
Financial professional. I mean, in some ways, yes. In a lot of ways, yes, but in some ways, not really. For example, when somebody's, you could tell somebody's just starting out in the industry when they call themselves a financial professional. Because legally, you're not allowed to call yourself a financial planner unless you have the licensing.
Gotcha.
Right? So that's important to know. But the way I look at it is there's different aspects to this industry. So there are what we call your investment advisors. Investment advisors are people that think about walking into a Chase Bank, right? Mm-hmm. Beautiful building. You see the nice window with the suit behind the desk that meets with private clients. That's your investment advisor, or your Morgan Stanley or your Merrill Lynch or people like that, right? Investment advisors, and do a great job investing your money, and that's their main focus, is investing your money. Then you have financial planners, and their focus is kind of in the name. They focus on planning your finances. They may also invest your money. They may also recommend other products, but their real focus is financial planning. And on the other end of the spectrum is sort of kind of where I'm at, and that's wealth management. So wealth management is really the integration of all of these interdisciplinary fields, right? It's the handling of investment management, it's the handling of cash flows, it's the handling of financial planning, but it's really putting the client in the center and saying, it's fully understanding everything that has to do with this person's finances, the family dynamics, their tax situation, their business, their goals, their personal values, their personal vision, and then collaborating with the existing advisors, right? It's not just working with the client. It's also saying, hey, let's bring in your tax advisor into this conversation so that when you have a question, Mr. Client or Mrs. Client, instead of you going around to everybody and asking the same thing, you can ask the team and we can work together to come back to you with a concise answer. And I think that's what wealth management is about.
So pretty much, if I were to sum it up, an investment banker, he might say, okay, you have $5,000 here. I'll put it in this IRA account for you or whatever it is, just to invest your money. And I'm sort of done with it. Let it do its thing. Financial planner might be, oh, you want to buy that car. Here's how much you probably have to save to buy the car. And here's your monthly payments. Okay, good. And a wealth manager, you're more long term. Mm-hmm. You're more of, okay, I'm 25 years old now and I want to retire at 55. Mm-hmm. Miguel, how much money do I need to retire on? Oh, I need this much. And you're going to be able to calculate based on inflation and the cost of everything, what somebody probably is going to need to live the lifestyle that they want. And here's how much that they have to save going forward. Mm-hmm. And how do you plan that future for them? Almost more of a step-by-step. Mm-hmm. So if I'm somebody who, tell me if I'm wrong here. If I'm somebody who's like, I'm late 20s, early 30s, whatever, I make good money and I'm just kind of putting money in a 401k and I think that's good enough. I'm told it was, but not really sure, and I have some extra money to splurge on, so maybe I'll just throw in a savings account. That might be more who you're talking to, correct? That client who's like, okay, I'm not living paycheck to paycheck where I'm just paying off debt when I can barely afford to put food on the table. I'm like somebody who I want to start saving, but I have no clue where to do it.
Yeah, I think everybody's at a different stage in life, right? And so a good way to kind of measure whether you're ready to be working with an advisor or not is, well, first of all, a lot of wealth managers charge an upfront fee, right? So I have a fee that I charge. So we can't even get over that. That's sort of the first barrier. But the second barrier is also, I would say it's less about, hey, I have this extra $1,000, $2,000 a month. But it's more of, look, I'm genuinely really serious about getting my finances in order. I think I'm ready for that. I can have an honest conversation about what I think I want in life. These kinds of conversations, the types of questions that I ask, for example, are, where do you see yourself in 5 years, 10 years? What kind of vision do you see for yourself? And I'm not just talking about finances. I mean, paint me a picture. What does your family look like, right? What do you envision doing? And so if we can't even have those kinds of conversations, if you don't have a good understanding of your cash flow, and that might not be a good place to start with a wealth manager or financial planner. I think a great place to start is to really one of your other podcasters, guests on the show, said something that was interesting. YouTube has a wealth of information. So utilize that, I think, first to the best of your capabilities, because it's free, right? And I feel like once you're at that point where, I think the triggering factor is, once you're at this point where you start saying to yourself, all right, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I've watched all these YouTubes, what now? Where do I go from here, right? I'm doing okay, I feel good with it, but is there anything else that I'm missing? Is there something better that I could be doing with my money? I think that's a good place to be. Gotcha.
Okay, that makes total sense. You're at that phase in your life where maybe I have some debt, but it's manageable debt. I'm saving some money in either investment accounts or savings accounts, but I kind of want to think about, maybe I want to have kids, and I don't know what the expenses are going to be like. Are my finances even lining up to that? Or maybe I want to buy this really nice house in this area, and geez, can I really afford it? It looks like I can on paper, but what does it really look like? And that's kind of more the angle you're talking about. I always thought it was, you have an accountant who does your bookkeeping, or your tax guy who does your taxes, and then, they look for all these deductions for you or tell you how much your business is doing. But to have someone actually go through your finances, go through your life plan, what you want, look at how much you make and what you're spending and what you're investing, to be able to create that plan for you. I didn't even know that thing existed. So to hear that that's actually a real thing, I think is just incredible, to know that asset is out there. One challenge that I've seen, and it's part, I guess you want to call it the millennial generation, or you just want to call it maybe the way things are now, is it feels like the world is so expensive. Like you see housing prices in the Bay Area, for example. $1 million is going to get you anywhere in San Francisco a closet. Anywhere else in the country, like the Midwest, $1 million, you're living like a king. You got property, you got 6-bedroom house, the whole 9 yards. But here, different way of living. But at the same time, this seems to be where all the bigger money jobs are, all the tech jobs, Google, Apple, Facebook. They're all here, and they want the best talent, so they just open up the checkbook to whoever can give them the best resources. And for a lot of people around here, it may feel like they get priced out. They get priced out of the homes. Taxes in California are, some of the highest, if not the highest in the nation. And it sort of feels like the cost of everything just keeps going up. Whether I think eggs now, at the time we're recording this, are really expensive. Like I think it was like $8 for a dozen of eggs.
Yeah, I just spent almost $8 for a gallon of milk. My kids go through 2 gallons a week.
Yeah, like you would never have thought that when we were growing up, like that would ever get that expensive. And now here we are with the way these prices are. Do you kind of get that vibe from people where it's like, this is almost too much for me to deal with, and this is not something I can ever figure out?
100%. And I could tell you, I mean, full disclosure, that was me at one point in life. Like I said, I'm not your typical advisor where I was kind of lined up perfectly to be this advisor. I made a lot of mistakes in life. And for a long time, I kind of had that mindset. I mean, I was in high school and college. Sure, I was a kid, but I think that's totally a big part of our generation, right? I think there's 2 parts, right? There's one part of our generation that's somewhere around the age of 30. We kind of decided, I'm going to get my shit together, right? And this other half don't. And I think it's sort of split into 2 different types of intergenerations, if that makes any sense. But yeah, I think that's totally true.
Well, you see sort of how we grew up, how the mindset was different. Maybe we grew up in an area where it was, hey, you're going to go to college and you'll be the first person in our generation or our family to go to college and get a degree. Look at that. Awesome. Then you're like 24, 25 years old. Well, then that's probably the time you should get married. And if you get married, well, what comes next? The kids. So you got a college degree, you're married, you're about to have a family, you're going to get this big 6-figure job doing whatever your main major is. And that's good. Life's near, your plan's all set, and here you go. And then for those of us that tried to do it, you kind of realize, wait a minute, it's not so easy to find a job that pays me what I need to pay, what I need to make in, for example, the Bay Area. Am I ready to get married? I'm 25 years old. I get that was the thing, for our parents, and maybe it was a different way of living, but I kind of don't want to get married at 25. And how do I tell my parents yay or nay? Or maybe it's simply, do I want to buy a house? Do I want to spend all that money on a mortgage? It's nice, but maybe I don't want to live here in 6 months or a year. Compared to the other side of the generation that says, I'm just going to kind of go with the flow. I'm not going to get committed to a relationship, a mortgage, a specific job. I kind of want to find my own way, and then we'll just go from there. I do see people who maybe have taken that first path that were like, oh crap, I got myself so deep in this, and now I don't know how to pay for everything. I don't know how to save because I got bill, I got mouths to feed. How has your experience been with that kind of split within our generation?
I mean, the reality is, I wish I could say that, here's an easy fix, right? But it's a simple fix, and it's really just sitting down and actually planning things. So, when I was younger, before becoming a financial advisor, before I even knew I was going to become a wealth manager or be in the position that I'm in now, I was not saving as much as I should have. I did have some debt. I'll share a very intimate, I'm almost a little embarrassed by this, but so when I was in college, I was working full time and going to school full time. It was the only way I could afford school. So there's a lot of people that I think can appreciate that, that were in the same shoes. And I didn't have a ton of money to spend, even though I was making pretty good for being a 19, 20-year-old. And there was some fraternity brothers that I saw. They were like, oh, they're living on their own. They're driving a new car. They got all this money. They're going out to eat. They're going to parties. Where's all this money coming from? And then I figured out, oh, they took out a loan. Oh, that's cool. I was like, well, maybe I could take out a loan and help pay for the school. I did not need a loan. But I took out a loan anyways. And so it was just mistakes like that, right? That I made. But ultimately what got me back on track, besides being in the industry and sort of learning the ways of the trade, is sitting down with myself and really asking myself, how am I going to dig myself out of here? And it's literally coming up with a plan. You can dig yourself out of any hole. You just have to sit down and put in the work. When it comes to debt, when it comes to finances, the beauty of it is it's a numbers game, right? You just have to find the right math. It may take you a year, it might take you 2 years, it may take you 4 years, but you can come up with a plan. And once you have that plan, now you have this motivation, you have this drive. You're no longer just going to work. You're no longer just going to work because you got to earn a paycheck to put food on the table. You're going to work because you know that 20% of your money is going to go to pay off that debt, right? You have a plan. And it just gives you more purpose, I think. And I think if more people spent time doing that, they'd be better for it.
What do you think about the generation, or our generation now, that's a little bit entrepreneurial? There's especially around here, there's a lot of people our age who want to start new companies. There's a lot of people our age who want to do their own business. There's a lot of freedom in that to know, let's say you're a personal trainer and you want to have your own business. Just decide what clients you want. You don't want to work under the 24-hour fitness umbrella or whatever it is. You want to do your own thing. And in doing that, you may understand it's going to take you time to build, your company, to build your reputation, to build your clientele. But in doing that, the money that you're bringing in is very limited because you're just starting off. You're getting your feet to the fire, if you will. But then as time goes on, you start getting, maybe in your 30s, you start maybe asking yourself, okay, I'm doing good now with my business. I like where my clients are at. I like where the flow is going. I can make enough money to survive, pay the bills, pay my rent, whatever it is. But man, I'm supposed to retire at 55, right? Because that's what my dad did or my mom did.
Right.
And I'm 35 now. It's 20 years away. It's like, whoa, now things start getting real. Like, how am I going to save this money? And because I want to build my business, I want to invest back in the business to keep it going. But then shouldn't I be putting something away? And I see that a lot around here because, it's the entrepreneurial spirit with our generation. We want to build those things. But then we have this sort of metaphorical clock that says we're supposed to retire at 55. Or whatever it is, because that's what our parents were supposed to do. And then we look at the numbers like, there's no way I can save the money for that. I just, especially live in the Bay Area, how am I going to save up?
Yeah, you got to save $100,000 a year.
It's crazy, yeah.
Right.
And like, how do you break through that barrier?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, you said a couple really important things. First of all, the question you're talking about, that audience is exactly who I work with, business owners and entrepreneurs. That's the majority of my clients. So I know that space very well. It's tough. It can be tough sometimes, and I have had some real conversations. And sometimes, when things aren't in alignment, you mentioned it, we sometimes have to change course. I was talking to a client a couple of years ago. They're living in San Francisco, kind of similar situation you just described. They're making good money, but they just can't seem to get to that next level. They have these big dreams and ambitions. And I just flat out asked them, why are you still living in San Francisco? Have you thought about lowering some of your expenses? Well, the lifestyle, my friends are here
Yep.
and all this stuff. It's like, well, how much do you really care about this goal then, right? So one of the things I do when I start off, I actually just recently started doing this because, so I'm married, I have 2 kids, and my wife and I, we've talked about finances and goals and all that stuff, but we never actually really sat down and done formal financial planning because it can be really awkward. It's kind of like,
And you're the expert too.
and I'm
We
the
never
expert,
actually-
right? But it's like, my wife and I are very different. I'm very goal driven person. She's loves to live in the moment, and we balance each other out that way. So having these conversations, I'm the one asking the questions. So it's like, imagine being your own therapist for your,
Yeah.
could be a little awkward. But when we were going through this, I realized, one of the things that would be really helpful for us to talk about is our values. What do we value as a family? And I think that for your listeners, this would honestly be a place that I would start. What are your values? And I'm not talking about like, I value Ferraris or I value, no, it's I value family. I value hard work. I value health. I want to live a long time. So health and fitness is very important. My community, things like, so what are your values? What do you believe in? What's your compass that moves you forward? And also, what's your vision, right? Think about, and make sure those 2 things are aligned, right? Because if all of a sudden you start telling me, well, my vision is I want to have this nice car, I want to have this big house and, all these kids. Well, hold on, wait a minute. You just told me about all these other things that you value. How do these 2 line up, right? So I think it's a really good exercise for people to start. And I actually have a lot of my clients go through that. So tell me about your values. Tell me about your vision. Start there. And then once we start talking about our goals, my goal is to retire at age 50 or at age 55. It's like, okay, well, that's in line with your values. So the same person, if they would have gone through that exercise of trying to figure out what their values are and what their visions are, when I asked that question, why are you still living in San Francisco? Have you thought about moving anywhere else? The response might have been a little bit different. Actually, you know what? You're right. I just talked about how I really value adventure and travel, and I think I have to honor that, right? So there's you got to dig deep, I think, sometimes.
With that, and you said a lot too that I really want to get into, but I want to get your thing here for the millennials, especially. What does retirement actually mean, especially to you as a financial planner? Because I would almost guarantee you, your definition is probably different than what the masses think. The masses might think, okay, at 50, I hang it up and then I'm going to live on the beach with margaritas.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you wanted to do that, there's only so much that you can actually do before you're going to start going crazy. Like, what else am I going to do with my life? So how would you define retirement for your clients?
Yeah, retirement, I like the term financial independence better, right? So the way I look at, so when somebody tells me I want to retire at ... I think, oh, you mean you don't want to have to ever work again. Like you are now living off of your assets, off of the real estate properties that you bought, you sold your business, or you've accumulated enough assets where now you're drawing income from them, and you don't have to work. You could if you want, but you don't have to. Financial independence, that to me is retirement.
How about that? And then trying to get that message through, financial independence, how does that click with your clientele?
There's sometimes some pushback. I've had some clients where we're having this conversation and they're telling me about their values. One client told me about how their values are family. They talked a lot about their kids. Their kids are the number one most important thing to them. They want to make sure that their education is paid for, et cetera. And then when they talked about their vision, they started talking about the cars and the house and all these things. And I'm like, wait a minute, you just told me all this stuff about your kids. Where do your kids fall in the BMWs and the nice house and all this material stuff? I didn't say it that way. But so there is this pushback, and I think that's why, one of the questions you asked earlier is, I think what you were getting at is, how do people differentiate financial advisors, and how could they find somebody, whether it's somebody like me or anybody else? And I think a good question to be asking is my financial advisor currently, or is a person that I'm working with, are they asking me these sorts of questions? Are they challenging me in my belief system? Mm-hmm. Right? Or are they just gathering assets? Are they just managing my investments? That's what most advisors do. They invest your money, and that's how they get paid, and there's nothing wrong with that. But they're not really focused on getting to know every detail about your life and helping you along the way.
Exactly, because you give them the money for these investors and say, hey, I want to just put my money in a way where it's going to grow the fastest or whatever it is. Putting it that way, it's if you give money to a financial investor, they're going to say, hey, you want to invest your money? Okay, I got this great BlackRock investment portfolio. You put your money there, it's going to grow at X amount. So by the time you're this much, you're going to have X amount of money. One thing. But then actually that's independent of what you want to use your money for.
Yeah.
They're just saying this might be a good investment for you to make more money long term, but that doesn't mean you're going to have enough to live off of.
Yeah.
Or maybe your goals that then are going to be, well, what if I have 3 kids and I want to put them all through college? Well, how much does college cost 20 years from now? Are you going to pay for their dorm? Are you going to do X, Y, and Z? They don't really put 2 and 2 together, but in your industry, that's kind of what you do, correct? It's more, we don't necessarily say, hey, put money in BlackRock or the Dow Jones, whatever. It's like, if you want to have this lifestyle here, here's how much it's going to cost. How much do you make? Where else do you get money from?
Yeah.
Are the numbers doable? If they're not, how do we help you make them doable? And are you ready to make the choices that you need to make that happen? And correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure some people might be like that come to Jesus moment where they say, wow, is this really what I want then? Because if this is what's going to take to get there,
exactly. Yeah, I actually, last week I had a client, it was a kind of a come to Jesus moment, and she actually asked me a really good question that not a lot of people have asked me before. And it's, she goes, wow, you're laying it out very clearly. So I guess the question that I have is, how much money should I be making in order to hit my goals, right? And it's not what you're thinking. So this is somebody who's making very good money. She's making, a couple $100,000 a year, but she is stressed out. She does not have a life. We talked about her values and her vision and her goals. And so then she started thinking, she's always been talking about maybe working less and not being so stressed out. There's a lot of millennials who are in the tech world who are just being overworked. So her question wasn't how much more money should I be making? It was, what's the minimum amount? And isn't that an interesting question? What's the minimum amount that I need to make in order to still hit my goals? Because where she was thinking now that we've had this conversation is, how can I be happier about life, right? How can it's no longer about just making more to make more. It's about aligning your values, your vision with your financial plan.
Man, that's excellent verbiage right there, because it really is that way. And a lot of probably the bigger challenge you're going to have is, how do you convey that to people who are stuck in the moment? Tech money is a good example. We're at a point now where they're going through a lot of layoffs. We're kind of getting back to the level where we probably should have been before the pandemic, but everybody overhired, and now they're kind of like getting their personnel where they feel that they're supposed to be, given the environment that we're in. And with tech money, it's very easy to say, okay, I got to get the new BMW. I want to buy that house in Emerald Hills, or I want to, live that lavish lifestyle. And they're kind of being brought back down to earth to say, well, right now the money's not there as much as it was maybe during the pandemic. You have to be able to live within your means. And some people are really kind of figuring out, well, what are my means? What is the path going forward? Have I ever even thought about the term financial independence, or am I still in the mindset of, I'm just going to hang everything up when I'm 55 or 60 and then, live on the beach the rest of my life? People are trying to ask themselves these questions now, and the answers they're probably going to get are going to be very, maybe tough to swallow, maybe thinking about an angle that they never thought about it in the past. So how would you, the best way that you can kind of put it, how would you kind of convey to people who are in their 20s and 30s who maybe are making more money than they ever thought that they would on paper, but that that money on paper doesn't really match up to what you probably want to do in the future. How do you kind of break through that first barrier to say this is something that we can talk about?
Yeah, that's a really good question because it kind of goes back to what I was talking about burning out. It's not uncommon for people in our generation, millennials, to be making good money. Granted, we talked about the split generation, right? There's the ones who got their shit together, and the ones who didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about the ones who did get their shit together. Some of them, a lot of them, are making really good money. Like they're killing it. Side hustles, starting construction companies. They got a cush job, and cush, I mean good income and stock options at a tech company and all that, right? But nobody talks about how hard it is. Right? They might have the house, they might have a nice car, they might be the millionaire next door in some ways, but they're realizing themselves, I can't keep this up. Mm-hmm. I can't be working at this pace for the next, or maybe I could, but I don't want to.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference about millennials is, I think I might be overgeneralizing here, but maybe Gen Xers are like, whoa, no, this is the responsible thing to do. You just got to grind it out.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think our generation is we do like to appreciate life and be in the moment, and we understand. We are having children. We want to spend time with our kids. That's me. I'm all about work-life balance, and so how do I respond to that? Great. So you're 35 years old. You're making good money. You can't keep this up for 20 years. Maybe you could keep this up for the next 5 to 10 years. Let's work with that, right? Let's maximize what you're doing now for the next 5 to 10 years. We got to be extremely intentional. If you're serious about this, right? If you're serious about retiring at age 55, here's what it looks like. It's not impossible, but are you willing to do it?
Gotcha.
Right? And so then what happens after 55, right? Let's talk about that too. So, you're going to grind out for the next 5 to 10 years, maybe 15 years. But you're not done yet. You really think someone like you who's been working really hard is just going to throw everything out and say, all right, I'm done from 55 to, potentially age 100. Right. Absolutely not. Those people are probably going to end up doing something else, but they're going to choose, right? They have a choice of what they can do. And it's no longer, again, about, I need to be making $2, $3, $4, $500,000 or more a year to do this. So that's how I would respond to that.
Do most people that you work with have they ever stopped to think about what life is like after the retirement age, 55, 60? Have they really stopped to think of what that means to them? Or do they kind of come to you saying, well, I'm just still going to work. I'm just going to keep working, right? That's the way it works. What's the kind of the response you get to that part of it?
Depends on the age. If we're talking about millennials, I would say the vast majority, including myself, it's hard to picture, beyond age 55. I don't even know what I'm going to look like when I'm 45. Yeah. Probably the same with a little bit more white hair. I think for our generation, millennials shouldn't feel alone. Like, everybody else got their shit together. Everybody else is already thinking about retirement. Nobody's thinking about retirement. Mm-hmm. Everybody says they're thinking about retirement, but believe me, when I'm sitting across the table from them, they're not thinking about retirement. And that's okay. Let's figure out, you're at point A, we want to get to point B. How do we get there, right? And let's just focus on the things that we can control. For other generations, I think where it's easier for people to start thinking about retirement, obviously, is when you're at that age of 55 or 60. You have 5 to 10 years left. Now you're really thinking, because if you own a business, you said something earlier that I thought was important to touch on. Entrepreneurs, people who are running businesses, they want to reinvest back into the business to keep it growing. And that's great. But there's also a huge problem with that. I mentioned I work with a lot of business owners, and what I've found is many business owners, by the time they get to age 55 or 60, the majority, I'd say somewhere between, at the very minimum, 50 to 90% of their net worth is tied to the business, right? So they might own a house. We're not counting the house because they need a place to live. But when I look at their 401ks, when I look at their investments, when I look at rental properties and I add all that together, it's peanuts compared to what the business is worth. So what does that mean? That means that now they have to, they're dependent on selling the business for the right dollar price for them to continue their lifestyle. So where I think those people, whether they're millennials should learn from this and say, let's hustle. Let's grow this business. But if we're growing at 10, 20% a year, let's take 2 or 5% and build a plan B, right? If the business ends up failing or if the business doesn't sell for what I think it's going to be worth, at least I have these assets to carry me out, right? And so that's kind of what financial planning is all about.
Gotcha. So you could have a business, whatever, pick your category, and it could be valued at like, $1 million business based on sales or projections or whatnot. So on paper, you might have a net worth of like $1 million. But in terms of actual cash, like if you had to retire today or, you broke your leg and now you can't do whatever that business is, that money is all tied up in your business. You can't like just pull from it necessarily and then go pay your rent or pay your mortgage or buy a new car or whatever. It's all in that business. So that's predicated on the fact that you can sell that $1 million business for $1 million or more. Now you'd have cash flow minus taxes and whatnot to be able to say, what can I do with that money now?
Exactly.
We get so caught up on that here. You hear all these Silicon Valley companies, this one's worth $10 billion or it's valued at $35 billion. And you think that person who created it is rich. Like they walk on water. Look at that. They started from nothing. They got a $35 billion company. And what we forget is that that's on paper. That's what somebody says it's worth. But, trying to get that much money out of it, if it goes public or whatnot, that may or may not happen. We see success stories like when Facebook went public and all those people just got rich overnight. Then you hear other companies like WeWork, they're valued at how many billions of dollars, and then they realize things are a little shady over here. Then the valuation just dropped by, I don't even know what the numbers are. And then really that guy, whoever, I forgot what his name was, one day he's worth $35 billion, or like that Sam Bankman-Fried, the FTX guy. One day he's worth $35 billion, the next day it's zero. It's all gone. It's like, it's all funny money. Well, it's all on paper, you're worth that much, but you don't really have it as hard currency.
Yeah. Well, and it's even harder when I was first starting out in the industry. There was a business owner who I wanted to have as a client, and I'll never forget this conversation because I really felt like I could help him, and I could have. But he said to me, "I'm doing fine. I'm making $300,000 a year. I have a car. I have a house. I could afford whatever I want. I don't need any help." What he was basically telling me is, right now at this moment, I'm good. So what is that telling you? He's not thinking 10, 20, 30 years down the road. And that's a mistake. Hopefully at some point, he is putting some money aside. But, I think that's the other part of it, right? Is one thing, it's on paper, but if you're also telling yourself, well, yeah, I'm actually bringing in a lot of cash flow, but then you're spending it all, then what's the point?
Yeah, exactly. And, trying to get us to manage our money better. It's so easy to see that dollar figure, that paycheck coming in front of me thinking that life's good, but then planning it down the line, it can be a difficult thing. So I kind of want to transition from that to say, okay, you have somebody who is, let's say they're thinking about retirement, and you've kind of already laid down the foundation of what does retirement mean. It's actually, let's redefine it to say, what was the term you used?
Financial independence.
Financial independence, exactly. Which doesn't mean you stop working necessarily. It just means that you don't have to live off of a specific paycheck. Like you saved enough money, whether your 401k or whatnot, or other investments, where if you wanted to sort of walk away, you can adjust your style of living and you would be fine based upon the money that you saved. But what does that term actually saving looks like? So kind of help me break down, because a lot of us confuse these two, savings and investments, and what kind of is maybe had been the benefit one way that may not be now.
My reaction is like this because I really empathize with people because it is really confusing. You Google how to save for retirement or whatever, and you get a million different answers. And it's like, well, okay, so this is telling me I should invest in my 401k. And this is saying that 401ks are terrible.
Yeah.
What's the right answer, right? So the way I would approach it is, all right, let's break it down from the very basic level, right? So for your listeners out there who are at this point where they're leaning into this conversation right now at this moment, and they're saying, okay, this is the part I was kind of waiting for. Is what are the steps I need to take? So here it is. First thing you need to do is have a good understanding of your cash flow, right? So what's cash flow? Cash flow basically is what money comes in and what goes out, right? So an example could be, I make $5,000 a month. Cool. That's your cash flow in. And then what's your cash flow out? What are your expenses, right? And I'm not saying what you want to spend, but what are your necessary expenses? Housing, food, entertainment. Entertainment's necessary. If you're a millennial, you got to be entertained. So what are those expenses? So whatever is left over, that's your budget. That's your surplus. Hopefully there's a surplus. If there isn't a surplus, then we got to come back and talk about some other things. Let's assume there's a surplus. So now we have a surplus. Surplus is basically whatever's left over. So we've gone through the cash flow exercise. What comes next is trying to figure out, all right, let's identify some goals. Maybe I have some debt. I owe $10,000 in a credit card. I also want to retire. I think that's important. I have a kid, and college is important, so I want to help fund their education. So I have all these different things. How the hell am I going to do all of that with just $1,000 a month, right? Mm-hmm. I can't put it all in one thing, and if I spread it out, it's just not going to do anything, right? So what do I do? So in that scenario, this is hypothetically speaking, right? I might focus on just paying off the debt first, right? Pay off that debt. Maybe you're paying $400 a month on that debt. Well, if you free that up, now it's not $1,000 a month that you could save. It's $1,400 a month that you could save, right? So let's pay that off as quickly as possible. Maybe this person's plan was to pay it off over 3 years. Let's try to pay it off in a year.
Yeah.
Right? And really start working. So there's different buckets, right? And it doesn't necessarily have to look that way. So once you have a good understanding of what your cash flow is, and you have a good understanding of what your goals are, then it's about dripping money into different buckets. I like calling them buckets, right? Mm-hmm. So we have short-term buckets, mid-term buckets, long-term buckets. Let's just call it like that. There's different investment vehicles that fit into each one. But for all intents and purposes, if I have $1,000, we can now decide, all right, I'm going to put X amount of dollars into my short-term bucket. That goes to debt, whatever. I'm going to put, X amount of dollars into my mid-term bucket. That's going to help my kids' education. And I'm going to put this much to my long-term bucket. And over time, when I pay off my debt, I get to spread that extra money over the other two buckets. Make
gotcha.
sense?
Okay.
So that's the approach that I would take.
Here's one thing I want to ask you with that. Social Security. Mm-hmm. We kind of grew up thinking, okay, we're paying into Social Security when we retire, which I think the age now is 70 for Social Security to pull out. I forgot what it is. That's going to take care of me, because that's kind of the image that was, or the message that was given to our parents and grandparents, is that you're going to be okay. That's why we created it. It doesn't take, the older that we get, the more the writings on the wall that system is not sufficient going forward. But do you see a lot of people that you talk to still believe in it? Like, well, I'm going to have that, so that's got to count for something, right?
No, not really. I think most people, either because they've heard it from others or they've read about it. I think the majority of people that I talk to, they don't even think it's going to be there for them.
Oh, good. I'm glad you're getting that mindset.
Yeah, millennials. I mean, sometimes when I don't work with a lot of millennials, but when I am working with them, we'll sometimes kind of laugh about it. It's like, well, we're gonna include Social Security in your financial plan, and they're like, really? It's like, well, until we know otherwise, we got to include it, right? But
gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, so what age do people typically find you, or are you finding them? Like, how do you?
Yeah. So most of my clients are typically referred by CPAs, tax advisors, attorneys, or existing clients. I don't typically get a lot of traction on social media because I don't post a lot on social media. Probably should. But I do. So it comes a lot from word of mouth.
So what's usually the typical reason why someone's come up to you?
There's a lot of reasons, but if I had to kind of narrow it down to sort of like the most common, I think it would be people are starting to notice that they're accumulating a lot of cash. And that's actually not surprising. I mean, if you think about it, prior to last year and what happened with interest rates, and people were living good. The market was up. I mean, those were the glory days, right? And so people were saving money. COVID kept us in house, and so now all of a sudden people are learning how to cook and not spending as much money. So it was normal for people to kind of accumulate a lot of cash. And so I think lately one of the things I've been hearing a lot is, I have $300, $500 million in cash. What do I do with it? It's just sitting there, right?
It's a nice problem to have,
right? Yeah, but also not. I mean, it's. I just wrote an article recently. I titled it "More Money, More Problems." You could find it on LinkedIn, but it's true. The more money you come across, the more problems you see, and that's has a lot to do with taxes and everything. But But I'd say that's sort of the main problem that I'm seeing is people are starting to face more complexity than they feel comfortable with. And they start to do maybe a little bit of research and they realize, yeah, this is a little bit over my head. I think maybe I should talk to somebody who can guide me to this.
I see people that have the mindset, they'll never tell you specifically, but that have the mindset of, there's no way I can save. I don't make enough money. So throw in the towel and just blindly use up the credit cards and take out a bunch of loans and then somebody else's problem later. And it becomes an issue because this is kind of like our economy is based on consumerism. We have to spend. The millennials are the ones who are spending all the money to keep the economy going. But at some point, when our generation starts to get into the late 40s and the 50s and whatever, spending just goes down. You don't need to buy that expensive BMW anymore. You just don't care about it. You don't need to buy the fancy Ferragamo shoes and the whatever Armani suits because it just doesn't have the same effect for you as it did when you were in your 20s. Do you see those people ever just hitting the wall where it's like, I need to get my act together?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always going to be those people who just, and then you talk about 40s, well, then you hit midlife crisis. And so maybe you do go buy that fancy car.
The way to say it.
Right. But I don't know. I mean, I could just speak for myself. I was one of those people that had to learn hard. I had to fall, rock bottom, which I did, when I was in college. I remember being at a point where I finally wanted to move out, and have some freedom. So I moved out, I had my job. Now all of a sudden I had all these bills and I realized I couldn't live the same lifestyle as I did when I was living at home with my parents when I was in college. And I crashed and burned and I had to move back for a little bit and so I could get my shit together.
How did you overcome the idea of, look at my books, they're horrible between debt and whatnot. And how do you go from saying, screw this, I have no clue how to deal with it, I'll just go with the flow, from not saying that to saying, I have to get my act together. I need to hunker down, save money, get a better paying job, whatever it is. Yeah. What was that thing that helped you go down the correct path?
That's a really good question. So I had a lot of people in my life that believed in me throughout my entire life. And I say that because I didn't really believe in myself. And I don't know if your listeners can maybe relate to that at all, but when I was in elementary school, I was bullied a lot. I didn't have a lot of self-esteem, going to a lot of stories there. So I had very low self-esteem, didn't believe in myself, didn't think I'd ever be successful. But yet I had teachers, I had my parents, of course. I had friends who looked at me and said, man, this guy has potential. This guy's really smart, but he's just not applying himself, right? There's all these things, but... And so I had all the support and encouragement, but I just didn't have that inner belief. And at some point when I just hit that rock bottom, it was actually my mom. My mom, I remember I called her, I was 21 years old probably, living alone. And I was crying because I had a few dollars in my bank account and I was trying to figure out, should I put gas or should I go buy food? And, I was crying to her and I was telling her just about how stupid I felt and all this stuff. And she goes, she said all these wonderful things, you're smart, everything you've ever put your mind into, you could do. And maybe that's a millennial thing because I feel like a lot of us were kind of raised that way, right?
Yep.
With that kind of good parenting. But something happened and I just said, you know what, to myself, I never want to be in a position like this ever again, ever. And it was just a switch. And from that point on, I don't know, I just kind of got my shit together. And I think that switch happens for different people at different times. And for me, it was just kind of hitting that rock bottom, feeling that sense of embarrassment. Like, what are you doing with your life? Like, here's all these people who believe in you. Mm-hmm. And yet, so I had to have that deep moment with myself and everything kind of changed since then.
That's just incredible to hear because a lot of us go through the same thing. I went through a similar thing. You go through college and things come up, expenses. Next thing you know, you don't have enough money to pay for it all. So you start borrowing or using credit cards.
Mm-hmm. You got to surround with people who really believe in you, right? You got to find mentors. I think mentors are so important. When I was 18 years old, for example, I had a mentor. I started in real estate. Real estate was one of my first jobs, and I failed terribly. I probably spent more money in in trying to make it in real estate than I actually did. But it was a good learning experience, and I don't know, I was just surrounded by, again, people who saw something in me and thought I was going to go somewhere. And so here I am, 18 years old, and somebody goes, "Hey, you should go apply for this Citizens Advisory Council position for the city of Hayward." I'm like, okay, sure, whatever. Next thing you know, I'm 18 years old. I'm the youngest, commissioner for the city of Hayward, and we're managing block grants from the state of California to go to these nonprofits. And the only reason I bring this up is because I somehow ended up getting surrounded by people who were looking after me, right? And so how does somebody get to that point? Well, if you're at a place right now where you feel like, man, I'm in a rut, I can't just, I don't have the motivation to just button up my belt and tighten my bootstraps and just get my shit together. Like, it just doesn't work for me. I know I got to do it, but I just can't do it.
Yeah.
You got to go out and really be vulnerable and talk to people and make that happen. I got lucky, and it just kind of landed on me. I say that now. I'm sure it wasn't luck, and there was things that happened. But when I reflect on it, it just feels like luck, because not a lot of people have that. And so I'm grateful for that, and I don't take it for granted. So if somebody is now in their 30s and they're still feeling that way, or they're 25 and they're still feeling that way, then you got to go out and make it happen. And the best way to do that is just ask. Hell, if I get somebody that messages me on LinkedIn and say, "Hey, I heard about what you said, I have a lot of questions, can I get half an hour of your time? Can I get you coffee?" Hell, I'll buy you coffee, right? There are people like me, like you, I'm sure, who are more than willing to talk about their experiences and point people in the right direction, right? And I think it's just about asking, having that confidence to just ask.
Exactly. Now, with that, I wanted to ask you your personal experience and also what you've been seeing in your industry. What are some of the biggest lies that we've been told in finances in terms of, here's some of the classic ones I can tell you. I have to buy a home because that's what everybody did. A 401k is going to be enough. It just is. I can retire at 50, or maybe if I can afford the payment on a car or mortgage, then I'm good. That means I can afford it.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. I mean, the 401k is a good one. I've heard mixed conversations. I've heard some people say, "Oh yeah, the 401k is the best thing for your retirement. If you do that, you're set." Well, actually, multiple studies have shown that, sure, if you're making $50,000 a year, hypothetically speaking, if you're making $50,000 a year and you max out your 401k, yeah, you're probably going to be set. But if you're making $50,000 a year, can you afford to put $20,000 a year into your 401k? Probably not. On the other end of the spectrum, if you're making $200,000 a year and you max out your 401k, that's peanuts, right? That's a drop in the bucket compared to what you need. So yeah, there's lots of lies like that.
Like, how about the home one? That's a big one. Is I still, I grew up with that mindset. You have to buy a home. That's just what you do. Do you think it's as simple as that? Or it's like, well, maybe real estate, maybe, but doesn't necessarily mean you want to buy that home that you're going to be in for 30 years. How would you interpret that one?
Yeah, I think I might upset some of my advisor peers or my real estate colleagues with my answer. But, I have the saying that I say to my clients: there's some things that make financial sense and there's some things that make emotional sense, right? When it comes to buying a house, a lot of times it does make some financial sense, right? I mean, think about it. You're paying $3,000 a month in rent. Next year it goes up to 31, 32, 30, continues to go up. It doesn't take a math geek to figure out that at some point you're going to be spending significantly more than what you would if you would have just had a fixed payment for the rest of your life, right? So the math makes sense a lot of times to buy a house. The question then becomes, well, where do I buy it? It goes back to that guy who I was telling you was living in San Francisco. Should he be buying in San Francisco, or should we maybe be looking at Austin, Texas? So then there's the other side, right? There's the emotional side. So financially, we established in most cases, it does make some financial sense to buy a home. And I'm sure my advisor friends and my mortgage friends, real estate friends are happy about that. But then there's the emotional side. There are some millennials, I'm sure some of your listeners here, who firmly believe, I do not want to buy a house, right? I think, I think it's a deeper conversation, Where is that coming from? Right? If I look at my life, when somebody asks me, what's the number one event that happened in your life that's just engraved in your memory? And for me, it's the recession, people losing their houses. So yeah, no kidding. You ask a millennial, should he buy a house? Do you want to buy a house? Well, no, my dad lost 2 of them. Like, why would I want that? Right? Why would I want that risk? So it's really scary for some people. So I think there's an emotional aspect to it. Does that make sense? Well, I mean, maybe. Are you going to be living in fear and stressed out if buying a home for you means that you have to pay off that mortgage as quickly as possible so that you're not afraid?
Right.
Well, maybe that doesn't make sense. Yeah.
So with that, especially around here, do you see people making the choice that buying a house is more of an emotional thing?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of things. It's not just one, right? And that's just how my mind works as a wealth manager, right? I just don't just think about one aspect of things. Because if you're just focusing on the payment, let's say you have a family of 4, 2 kids, husband, wife, or couple. If they are just looking at the payments, well, maybe they can only afford a condo. Well, that's not going to work out, right? So I think it goes back to the values. It goes back to the vision. It goes back to the goals. If we want to buy a house, yes, the payments definitely have to be important. There could be a little cushion where I feel comfortable with some people where, it might make sense to stretch a little bit. But if there is a good indication, if we can show 3-5 years of history that income is consistently going up, then okay, as an advisor, I feel confident in saying, yeah, okay. Yeah, your income's been going up by about 5% a year. So, it'll feel like a stretch right now, but, in a couple of years, it'll just be like a normal payment. So that might be fun. And then, if it turns out that the payment does not match at all to what the house they want, then they really have to have a conversation about, like one of our friends did. Do we need to live in California, or should we be moving to some other state? Like a state like Idaho, right?
Exactly. It's kind of like a lot of people are doing that now. We see people leaving California en masse to go to Texas, Nevada, Idaho, Florida because of either state taxes or cost of living or maybe politics for some people. And, it forces them to reevaluate what is more important to me. To help out some of our listeners in terms of what a financial planner would actually do. If somebody wanted to come to you and they pay their fee and they wanted to say, okay, Miguel, I want your advice. Walk me through the types of questions you typically would want someone to think about, or you would ask them yourself to kind of figure out how you would go forward with them. Yeah.
So one of the first things I ask people is, it's really kind of about why they're here, right? Tell me about what's the 1 to 3 things that you want to get out of this relationship, right? If you're going to hire me, if you're going to hire an advisor or wealth manager or whatever, what are your expectations? Right. I think a lot of people make the mistake in going to a financial advisor or wealth manager because they think they should, but they don't have any expectations. So I think it's really important for people to go into that meeting with being able to answer that question. What do I expect out of this? Right. I mean, do I simply just want more money? Well, do I need an advisor for that? Then we kind of start getting a little bit deeper, where I might ask, how much of a concern is retirement for you? Is it important to you at all? Financial independence or not? Well, if you're 25, if you're 30, 35 years old, talking about, retirement, financial independence might not be the most important thing, but I need to know that because I want to know where we should be focusing our attention. Right. Another question is, that a lot of people haven't really thought about is, how important are tax deductions for you? How much of an understanding do you have about taxes? As it pertains to your financial situation.
How are you thinking about life? Do you find that people have never stopped to think about, what do I want? Has this been the first time that you've seen clients who have actually never asked themselves that type of question?
Yeah, and it happens more so with married couples, right? And I work a lot with married couples. They'll come into my office, or actually these days it's more like a Zoom meeting. Everything is done over Zoom. We'll start the meeting and we'll start going through these questions. And sometimes it feels like a therapy session because I start asking, one of the partners, hey, what's your values? What's your vision? Maybe there's some alignment there. And then we start getting into goals. I had one client that was telling me, actually, when I retire, I'd love to buy a house at the beach. I want to move closer to the beach. His wife turns around and goes, I hate the beach. I don't want to live near the beach. Like, you never told me you wanted to live. So we had this whole conversation about that, right? So there's a lot that gets uncovered there. We talk about things that, sometimes people never really thought about. Life, what's life after retirement? So it might be easy to think about what I want to do between now and retirement.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people, I think the thing that people struggle with the most is, what do I want to do after I retire, right? What do I want to do after this transition? So after I'm done busting my ass off at Apple, or done busting my ass off, growing this business for the next 10 years, what comes next, right? And so there hasn't been a lot of thought to that. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about, again, what's going to make you happy? Because if we're planning on living a long life, it's not just about the money. It's about, making sure we're taking care of our health, making sure we're taking care of our mind. And what are we doing to do that? Are we exercising regularly? Are we, if you can afford a coach, are you paying for a coach? Are you going to the gym? Or are you just saying you want to live to 100 and not doing anything about it?
Well, I'm glad you brought up health, because that's a big one there that just sort of gets overlooked. Is, when we're young, 20s and 30s, we sort of think we're invincible. We can eat whatever we want and then work out whenever we want to, and we're just in shape, or we feel good. Then as you get older and your body changes, if you don't adapt to it the right way, the health concerns can start to pile up. And people may not think about, hey, me taking care of my body now in terms of physical fitness, mental health, and what I eat is going to affect me financially when I'm 50 or 60 years old. Because if I don't take care of myself, now all of a sudden I got to factor more into long-term health care. I got to factor more into what health insurance do I have at the time, and what does that cover? If I'm really bad at taking care of myself and I'm super overweight and I'm just not addressing it, then now you got to think about, well, geez, is the insurance going to pay for it if I end up having to go to the hospital and have to stay in long-term care, or where is that money coming from? So how big is, talking about that conversation about health is to people, and do you have to sort of explain what healthcare costs can actually look like in 15, 20 years?
Yeah. So we definitely talk a lot about health and wellness. In fact, with a lot of my clients, one of the things I've actually started doing this year is taking them out hiking. A lot of their advisors will take their clients out to dinners and things like that. And I think that's all fine. One of the things I just started thinking about is, well, if I'm going to have this phone call with a client, why don't I just go walk around the block with them and have the same conversation? At least we're getting out there. That's one thing. But another way we talk about health and planning for health is some people have access to what's called a health savings account, so HSA. So this is something good for a good little free tidbit for your listeners. So if you have access to a health savings account, this is very similar to like a flexible savings account.
Right.
Unlike the FSA, you don't lose the money at the end of the year. Right. So with the HSA, you got to have a high deductible plan. It has to be offered through your employer. But in this HSA, you could contribute, I think this year is a little bit over $7,000 a year for a family. That's tax deductible, right? So if we're talking about tax strategies, you can save a little over $7,000 a year, get a tax deduction. You can, in some cases, actually invest the money in the HSA. But think about it. Wouldn't it be nice to have a bucket of money when you're old and gray that has a couple $100,000 in it, that when you use that to spend for medical expenses is going to be 100% tax free?
So you don't pay taxes on it when you input it into the HSA, and then when you have to take it out for a major surgery, the government doesn't tax you again for it.
Yeah, let's talk about this real quick. So there's basically 3 different types of tax benefits that people need to pay attention to. The first one is called a tax deduction. Most people know about this, right? My wife's a teacher. She knows about it because she spends a lot of money for school supplies, and so she gets some tax deductions for that. Business owners know about it too. So there's a tax deduction. Then there's something called a tax deferral. So if you invest in a 401k, the money grows. You don't have to pay any taxes until you take the money out. So you're deferring taxes at a later point. But then there's the other end of the spectrum, the tax-free withdrawal. So in the U.S., there are probably, and I might be wrong on this, but there are probably only 2 vehicles that I can think of that you get the perfect trifecta, all 3 tax benefits at the same time. Every other investment vehicle, you're only going to get 2 out of the 3.
Right. Okay.
So 401k, pre-tax, tax deferral. Roth IRA, tax deferral, tax-free withdrawal. Follow me? So with the HSA, pre-tax, you get the tax deduction. Grows tax deferred, comes out tax-free. It's one of the only investment vehicles out there or savings vehicles out there that has that perfect trifecta. So and it doesn't make sense for everybody. You have to consider your health. If you're somebody who's going to the hospital, on a monthly basis, you may not want a high deductible plan because you're going to be paying a lot out of pocket. But if you're a millennial, you're in good health, you're not seeing the doctors that often, or, maybe once or twice a year, having a high deductible plan might be something you want to consider, because then you have access to an HSA. An HSA gets you those tax benefits and that bucket of money that you could use tax-free for health expenses down the road.
Gotcha. So that's one of them. What's another vessel where you get all three?
Long-term care insurance, although that industry is changing a lot. So long-term care is another one where, depending on your situation, whether you're an individual, you're an S corporation or a C corporation, you get some tax deductions up front for contributing to a long-term care. So you need to talk to your tax accountant to make sure, how that applies to you. But long-term care, by the way, is basically the inability to perform 2 activities of daily living. So,
if you can't walk and you can't stand, then that would be probably be considered with that.
Correct. Yeah. You can't feed yourself, things like that. So those people typically need care. They need help to do the things that they need to do. There's long-term care insurance. And so long-term care insurance, that industry, again, is changing a lot. There could be some tax benefits depending on the person in the beginning. It grows tax deferred because if you buy a product that has an inflation rider on it, the coverage that you buy increases over time. And then when you use it, as long as you use it for long-term care purposes, it's 100% tax-free.
Gotcha. Now, with that, I wanted to ask you your opinion on this. How do people think about their kids in long-term future? The old school way was, I'm going to have kids, and they're just going to take care of me when I can't, do my job anymore. And then I'll help raise my grandkids, and then I'll live in the house with them, and that's my retirement right there. Times have changed. A lot of people, for better or for worse, they just would prefer not to have to bring mom and dad into their own house with their family because it's just a different time now. How do you have that conversation with the people in terms of depending on, or should they depend on their kids taking care of them at old age?
Yeah, I think most parents, I could say, hopefully, at least the ones that I come across, most parents don't want to have their kids depending on them, but that doesn't always align with what's actually happening. So, I've talked to a lot of parents who they talk about how much they love their kids, and they're doing everything for their kids, right? They're putting them in sports, they're putting them in extracurricular activities, they're paying for their education, they want to pay for private schools and all these other things, and that's great. But how are you making sure that you're not going to have to depend on them? So I use this analogy, humor me for a second.
Yeah.
Have you ever flown on a plane?
Yep.
Okay. So when you fly in a plane, you sit down, you put your seatbelt on, what does a flight attendant start to do?
They go over the whole safety routine.
Yep. So when the mask comes down, what are you supposed to do if you have children?
Because I talked to John, I know the answer now. You got to put your mask on first before you put theirs on.
Exactly. And so I kind of use that analogy for a lot of my clients. And I say, look, it's kind of like that same thing in the plane. You got to take care of yourself first. And it goes and I'm a parent. It goes completely against our genetics as a parent, right? Every ounce of us wants to do everything possible to make sure this child succeeds. But in doing so, we have to change our frame of thinking. We have to think, well, if I want them to succeed, I have to be taken care of too. I need to make sure I'm okay so that I don't have to depend on my kids. And so then the planning changes. And I have had some situations where I had parents who were putting an enormous amount of capital towards their children, and we had to scale back a little bit on some things, and not in any negative ways, but they had real big goals and aspirations of being able to pay, private schools and higher education, where now we're thinking, okay, well, maybe that could still be a goal, but there's other ways of funding it. Maybe we can take out loans, maybe we can count on grants and scholarships. Instead, I'm going to use some of that capital that was funding towards my financial independence.
Gotcha. Okay, so people shouldn't be counting on their kids to take care of them at their advanced age for whatever reason, and we have to plan that way, correct?
I think it's a safe way to go. I mean, I can't speak for everybody, but Gen Xers are dealing with that right now. I think they're called the sandwich generation, where they're dealing with aging parents and growing children at the same time.
How are they dealing with? Do you have a lot of Gen X clients?
Yeah, I do.
Generally speaking, how are they trying to balance it? Are they saying, I want to put mom and dad in the care facility because they're better adept at taking care of them, but mom and dad are pushing back because it's not what they want, and I got my own kids? How are they sort of balancing it, generally speaking, or how's their mind processing it?
Yeah, not a lot of people talk about Gen Xers, and there's a lot of bad rap about them, but I have a lot of respect for Gen Xers. They are one of the best generations, I think, in my opinion, because they are very responsible. We were talking about this a little bit before the show, but they're the, trust but verify, right? They have an enormous, and this is generally speaking, of course, Gen Xers, I think, have an enormous sense of responsibility for both their children and their parents. In my experience, they're not always the type of people who are, let's just throw them in a nursing home or in a care facility. I've actually seen a lot of my clients use some of their investment properties to house their parents. So their parents may either not be paying any rent, or maybe they're just covering some of the expenses, like the property taxes on the home, things like that. And that's a hell of a lot better than flipping the bill for an entire, nursing home or something like that to take care of your parents. It's a lot less expensive. So there's a lot of that. There's families coming together and doing their parts, but it's not easy. Frankly, I don't get to hear a ton of it because I think Gen Xers, just by nature of being Gen Xers, don't talk about it as much. But it's tough, and they suck it up and they do it.
What has been your advice to people who, especially the Gen Xers who are at the age where they have to think about this, who didn't have kids or who couldn't have kids, in terms of how they have to plan to take care of themselves when they're 80, 90 years old, and assuming that they are in decent health? How do you help them prepare for that?
These are people who didn't have kids and...
Correct. Maybe they have, regardless of their financial situation, they don't have the kids that they can depend on for whatever reason. Maybe they didn't have the kids to sort of fall back and to take care of them at the advanced age. How do you have that conversation with them about here's how much it's going to cost for long-term care. Here's what the state can or cannot do. Here's what you have to be ready for. How do you plan for that?
Yeah. So, in our financial planning, we have a software that we use, that basically paints a picture. It's really cool. So I could learn everything about somebody's financial situation today. So let's call that point A. And then they tell me about everything they want to have happen later in the future, how they want to live their life, when they want to retire, how much income they want, all the travel they want to get done. That's point B. Let's call that point B. And then I get to see graphs and statistics and analysis that basically shows what's happening between now and point B. What it also allows me to do is throw in scenarios. So I could stress test the financial plan, and I can say, okay, well, look, this looks great, Gen Xer, right? So you're 46 years old. When you retired at 60, this hypothetical example looks great, but I could then stress test that financial plan, and I could throw in what happens if you have a long-term care event at age 80. How is that going to affect your finances? Oh, well, it looks like if you have a long-term care event at age 80, you're basically going to run out of money by age 83. So then what do we do, right? So doing that kind of planning allows us to be able to come up with solutions. So for a lot of those people, it might just mean repurposing some of the assets that they intended for income in the future. Insurance, I think, is still really important. Not everybody could afford long-term care insurance because it's really expensive. But it's a conversation around long-term care planning.
Okay.
And that could be solved a bunch of different ways.
Has it ever come across, or have you ever come across the issue of maybe you have somebody who has had kids, for whatever reason, they don't talk to each other anymore? I can't depend on my son or my daughter or whatever it is, that option is not there for them. And then they've had to readjust to say, I assume that I would just move in with my son or my daughter, and now I'm 55 and that option is not available to me.
When we talk about long-term care, which is an important topic, it's a very boring one and it's a very morbid one, but it's an important one because here's some statistics. Approximately 70% of people over the age of 65 will at some point in their lives have long-term care or have a need for long-term care, right? So if you make it to age 65 with no heart problems, you're in perfectly good health, you are actually statistically you have a higher chance of needing long-term care than somebody who has heart disease. Why? Because you're probably going to end up passing away from heart disease, right?
The way to look at it in an interesting way. Yeah.
It's sort of a morbid, boring conversation, but I guess the way to have that is to really look at, we build assets so that we can enjoy retirement. When we're talking about investing and saving for our future, we're not thinking about long-term care. We're not thinking about all those other things, but it's a conversation that needs to be had, especially for people who are aging and getting into that nearing retirement.
Right. Stage of life.
It's a stage of life. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, then that makes sense that when you have these conversations with people who are maybe their 30s or 40s who haven't thought about that, what happens to me 40 years, like they're basically at the halfway point from when they were born to where they might be at where they would need that long-term care, and not to say, okay, here's what you have to think about.
It's such a difficult conversation. I mean, it's like, here's the reality. Long-term care today costs somewhere between $4,000 to $7,000 a month in the Bay Area on average. Depending on, the facilities and the type of care you're getting. That's somebody's annual income.
Yeah.
Right? And that's just to live. That's just to receive care. It doesn't even cover your health insurance. It doesn't cover the food, so it's expensive. And so I have had a lot of conversations where it's like, okay, well, yeah, that's the reality. Jeez. I'm just going to kind of delay that as far as possible. But for those who do have the means, for those who are able to, either use their assets, whether it's real estate or their investment portfolios, to repurpose some of that to pay for some of the care down the road, that could be a good idea. It's also a good idea to talk to your estate planning attorney to plan for long-term care. But honestly, yeah, people in their 20, 25, 30, 35, maybe even 40, I wouldn't blame them if they're not really focusing on that. I personally wouldn't at this point, but it does become more important, and you absolutely need to plan for it as you get older.
Gotcha. So things to look forward to, well, not look forward to, but things that you're going to have to deal with eventually. And then the sooner that you can at least have that conversation, the better off you'd probably be in terms of how you're going to be financially when that time comes. That's definitely something that, again, nobody likes to talk about, but it's good to get it out there because at least it's on the table and you can decide how you want to handle that. And when it comes to actually planning it out. So we talked about homes, talked about long-term care. Go ahead. You were going to say something.
Yeah. I just, going back to, you mentioned earlier, what are some of the lies that are being told
yes.
about financial advisors? Oh man, I don't know why I didn't think about this before. So there's a really annoying one that I want to talk about.
Go for it.
So in my industry, I told you earlier how there's different classifications of what people are called, right? Mm-hmm. Financial advisor, financial professional. There's this big myth, and I kind of want to throw it on the table. There's a lot of people out there who dedicate their lives in selling things like life insurance, for example. Life insurance is a hot topic because there's a lot of controversy about it. Some financial advisors really use it to help clients protect their families, right? If I have 2 kids, if I die, I leave behind a couple $1 million, they're taken care of. Mm-hmm. But life insurance has some other purposes as well. You can also use it for saving and investing for the future. There's other purposes if you do it correctly. The myth here is that there's a lot of misinformation. I wholeheartedly believe people in the industry have all the right intentions. So let's kind of start there.
Got it.
All right.
Preface it with that. Okay. Good.
So there's good intentions with this, and these products can work really well. But life insurance as an investment class is not for everybody. And I really want to make sure that people listening to this, because quite honestly, it's people in my generation, our generation, millennials, who are making between, call it $80,000 and $200,000 a year or more. We are sought out. We are the market for this type of product. And so there's basically the backstory with life insurance. So life insurance can be used as a savings vehicle if you use it properly. There's a lot of tax benefits to it. But the reason I bring this up is because people are sometimes made to believe that it's the greatest investment for them, the only investment that they should be focused on. And that's just simply not true. For a lot of people, it doesn't make any sense for them. Here's a really important thing for people to understand about life insurance using it as an investment vehicle. You gotta make sure that you're funding it properly, right? Because the way these things work is if you're not funding it correctly, these things can sometimes blow up. I've reviewed policies from other people in the past where they're kind of using them as a savings vehicle, but they're paying like the minimum premiums and there's a little bit of money kind of growing inside. But we look at the forecasts and we can see that 10, 15, 20 years down the road, they have almost nothing to show for it.
If I think about life insurance in my point of view, I don't know anything about life insurance other than if I were to buy a policy, I assume, okay, if I buy a policy today and then I get hit by a bus tomorrow and my policy was for $1 million, let's say, then my wife would just automatically get $1 million and she'd be taken care of. Generally speaking, that's what I would think about life insurance. I've heard about different things between short-term life insurance and long-term, and that's where I get lost with it because I don't know, what the difference would be. I guess short-term would be, okay, I buy a 10-year policy, so if I pass on in that 10 years, then it kicks in, but if I make it past that 10 years, it's like, oh, well, I guess I misjudged that one in a way.
Yeah.
So I don't know really how the life insurance thing works other than if I buy it, I'm assuming that if something happens to me in that policy, whatever the policy amount is, my spouse would get it, but it's not quite that simple.
Yeah. Let's put it this way. There's basically two different types of life insurance policies out there. There's term insurance, what you just described, right? If you get hit by a bus, your family's taken care of. And then there's what's called permanent life insurance. That's
the other one. Okay.
Yeah. So permanent life insurance basically works in this way. You have $1. You put it into this bucket. Mm-hmm. Let's say that this water represents that bucket. So every dollar that goes into this bucket, a portion of that dollar, it's a couple cents, whatever, that's going to go to pay the cost of insurance, some administrative costs. Everything else that's left over is going to earn an interest, right? And so over time, as you keep putting more dollars into this account, and a portion of that goes to pay the cost of insurance and some administrative costs, you have this money that's growing inside of the life insurance tax-free. Now, if it's structured properly, you can also take money out of it tax-free, and that's all great. So the problem and sort of the myth here is, yeah, everybody should be doing this. Everybody should have a permanent life insurance policy because, it's a tax-free investment, right? So think of a Roth IRA. Mm-hmm. Roth IRA right now, the maximum contributions I think are
around $6,000.
Right. Yeah. And if you're over the age of 50, you could put like another $1,000 or so. So that's great. But if I'm trying to accumulate $1 million in that account, it's going to take me forever.
Good luck.
Yeah. Got to have like a 20% rate of return.
Jeez.
Or something like that. But with life insurance, we can increase that contribution significantly, right? We're not talking about $6,000. We could put as much as we want to an extent, right? $10, $50, $100, $500,000 a year, whatever the number is. So we can get to that goal a lot faster. The problem that a lot of people don't understand about these is, yes, they're great. Yes, they can work really well, but they're definitely not for everybody. So there's basically 3 rules that I have for people. So if somebody's out there listening and they've been talking to somebody from, I won't mention the name of the company, there's a lot of popular ones out there. If they're talking to an insurance agent and they're saying, hey, you should be investing in this, this is what you need to know. There's 3 rules, and they're not industry rules, they're Miguel rules. These are, you got to be able to fund this properly, right? So you got to ask the agent or the financial advisor, financial professional, ask them, what does it mean to fund this properly? Give me the maximum and the minimum range. You want to make sure you're funding this to the maximum amount. That's rule number 1. Rule number 2 is it has to be long-term. If somebody's investing in this for the next 5 years and they think this is going to be the greatest investment ever, it's not. This is a long-term investment because these products work in such a way where the majority of the expenses are front-loaded. So they got to probably wait 5, 10, sometimes 15 years in order to overcome a lot of these expenses. So you got to fund it right. You got to invest in it for the long term. And then the third rule is it has to remain a life insurance policy. At the end of the day, the reason why it's a tax-free investment is because the IRS is basically being told that when you pass away, there's going to be a death benefit that gets paid. And that's what makes everything inside of it tax-free. That's sort of the super fast gist of it. And I'm very passionate about this because, there's a lot of people in my family that were sold these types of policies. I've had a lot of friends that bought these type of policies, and they were just set up completely wrong. So it's just, those are definitely one of the myths. I think they're great products, but people should diversify their investments. Having a 401k, having money in the stock market, having some real estate is also a good option as well.
Okay, that makes sense. Or it's a better way to put it so people understand about what this whole life insurance was. And you educated me a lot because I was like, I was probably looking at it the wrong way, thinking, okay, maybe if I'm at an advanced age and it's like, well, I guess I should take out this policy for my spouse, but then it doesn't really necessarily have to work that way. You plan it right and you fund it correctly. This could be an extra tool that you can have in your bucket to invest in your future, if you will. And yeah, so definitely something that if you're listening to that right now, talk to your advisor about that if it's the right thing for you, because it may not be, or, it may be something you want to have more information about. Always a good thing to put out there. So we've talked a lot about how you would invest money, whether it's real estate or now life insurance and long-term disability insurance. These are great topics. So you're right. They can be kind of mundane to sit down and look at them, but they're important things that people need to at least think about for the future. Whenever it comes time for you to talk to a professional, these are the things that you want to ask with them. To kind of get people a little more excited about this prospect of financial investor or financial planners and whatnot, and specifically talking to people who maybe just think it's out of their league. They don't make enough money. They don't know how to save. They don't want to be, it's almost like you don't want to be told, hey, we need to you should reevaluate how your finances are going, because that's a hard conversation to have with people, to say.
Yeah, you're challenging our belief systems.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
people don't like that. They don't like to be told, oh, I guess all that money I was putting in the, in that Robinhood stock probably wasn't the best idea in the world. Or, I do have a BMW M3. And yeah, the payments are about $800 a month, but I like the car. I don't want you to tell me that it's not a good investment. How do you, getting through that is, can be a challenge with people. But generally speaking, if you're a millennial specifically, you're in the age of maybe 25 to about 35 years old, and you're probably making good money, or at the very least good money for where you live at, depending on what part of the country or the world you do live in. These are kind of the things that we kind of want you to think about. So if you're speaking to that audience specifically now about what it is that they should be thinking about now, even if it's not the time for them to go talk to a specific advisor, what are the things you want people to start thinking about now at that age group?
Yeah, it's really goes back to what I said earlier. What I would really encourage everybody listening to do is figure out how much you can afford to save and invest, right? And it goes back to, going through that cash flow exercise. Talk about that real quick. So there are some people who people fall into two different categories typically. The first category is somebody who makes money. They spend on rent, mortgage, whatever, their expenses, and then they try to save whatever's left over at the end of the month. I was one of those people many years ago, right? And then, that number changes every month. Some months I'm able to save X amount of dollars. The next month, maybe I can't, so I need to dig into savings, right? Then there's the other person. The other person who I think everybody should try to aspire to be is the type of person who saves first, right? So you make money, you set aside the money that you're going to save first, and then you spend what's left. Well, how are you going to do that? The only way to do that is to have a really good understanding of what your budget is. So I'm not the budget police. When I work with clients, we talk a lot about budget and cash flow, but I'm not going to be the one to say, hey, you can't spend that much on food.
Yeah.
But you got to have a good understanding of what your budget is, so that way we can know what we can play with. So know your budget, know your cash flow, figure out how much you can afford to save and invest. Once you're there, then the real encouragement is to start working. If you have debt, depending on the debt, if it's, have you ever heard of the snowball effect of paying off debt?
Go with that.
So the snowball effect. Let's say you have somebody who has 5 or 10 different credit cards with different interest rates and different balances. And they're paying, a lot on each of those credit cards, hoping to pay them all off. That's the worst way to go about it. The best way to go about it is to pay, this sounds completely counterintuitive, but pay the minimum on every single credit card except one. And usually it's the one that has the highest interest rate or the biggest balance. There's different math to this, but choose one credit card and apply everything you possibly can and pay as much as you can towards that credit card. Once you're done with that, take everything you were applying towards that credit card and move it to the next one. Guarantee you're going to end up paying I don't think I can say the word guarantee.
Yeah, can't guarantee, but odds are,
if you do it in this way, there's a really good chance you're going to end up paying that debt off significantly faster than you might have thought. And so I would start off with that. If you have some debt and you have a lot of it, or it's really high interest, I would focus on trying to get out of debt first. But then I get the question of, well, Miguel, I have all this debt. I'm also trying to save for retirement. So are you telling me that if it's going to take me 3 years, am I only paying off debt? I'm not saving for retirement? Well, no, not necessarily. I think it really comes to a numbers game, and that's something that a financial planner can help you with and decide. But yeah, I would take the majority of that and apply that towards debt, and you probably should be applying some of it towards your retirement. So again, figure out your cash flow, figure out what your surplus is, and then literally draw some buckets on a piece of paper and label them from left to right. Draw 3 buckets: short-term, mid-term, long-term. And whatever money you have left over at the end of the month, figure out how much you're going to drip into each bucket. And that's how I would apply it.
Gotcha. And for people who say that I need to pay off debt first, well, paying off your debt the way that you were explaining it about, for example, credit cards. You have 2 credit cards, pick one and just dump everything into that, make the minimum payment on the other one until the first one's done. You may not think that you're saving money for retirement because you're not taking X amount and putting in a 401k, let's say, but by you paying off that debt, that's interest that you're not paying anymore. Actually, it does help in a weird way for you to be able to save for your future, because once those debts are paid off, now that money, let's say it's $3,000 a month that you're not paying towards credit cards anymore. Now you can start putting money away more into a 401k or to a life insurance plan, whatever. But if you did it the other way where, okay, I have to invest, so I'll put $100 now because that's all I have. It's not bad, but getting rid of that debt that you're paying higher interest on first before you do that might be the better cause for somebody. So I guess it kind of comes down to this question here that people probably say to themselves: is it ever too late to start investing in my future?
No, I don't think it's ever a bad time. There was a 50-year-old a number of years ago. She was in fitness. She had a fitness business, and she was talking about how, she hasn't started saving for retirement and she can't afford to do anything. And I asked her, can you afford $50? I mean, you're spending this on dining out all the time. I see your social media posts. Yeah, I can afford $50. Well, just start there. The problem is, I think the reason a lot of people delay saving and investing is because they have it in their minds. If I can't save $1,000, $2,000 a month, what people are talking about saving, then it's not really worth it. But no, it is worth it. I mean, can I pull up my calculator real quick?
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, it's funny that you say that, because I was in that camp when I was in my 20s too. You hear stories about people who say, I'm putting $500, $1,000 a month into my 401k plan, and here we are at 22, 23 years old, and I'm like, well, I can't afford more than $10, so I don't know how am I ever going to catch up to you guys. And of course, you don't know the other side of the story, how people are getting those numbers there too.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when I can afford it later on in life and I can actually put that money away, now it starts growing. So I guess the bigger thing I had to get over with first is I can't compare myself to what somebody else says that they're doing in their life, because I really don't know how they're able to accomplish that. And maybe I don't want to know. All I can focus on is where I'm at with my life. What's that calculator going to say?
All right. So check this out. So this woman, and I did this calculation for her. I just don't remember the numbers. So I said, all right, can you save $50 a month? And she said, yeah. So I just threw out a hypothetical scenario. Let's say you save $50 a month. That's $600 a year, right? Multiply that over 20 years. And, how much money do we have? We have about $12,000, right? So not great. That's just putting it in cash, not earning anything. Mm-hmm. But let's just say that we can invest it into something. And let's just say that investment, hypothetically speaking, is earning an average of 8% over those 20 years. We're now talking about close to $30,000, right? So we've instantly doubled that and that's just talking about $600, right? If we call that $6,000, we're now talking about, $6,000 a year, Now we're talking about 275, almost over $250,000 just by saving $6,000 a year. So start off with what you can, right? Get that invested. The whole thing about investing, people always get it confused. It's not about timing the market. Should I buy now because the stocks are doing well, or should I buy now because the market crashed and everything's at a discount, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
It's about time in the market, not about timing the market.
Let's say I'm 35 years old and I haven't saved a dime towards any retirement account. And now I'm at a point in my life where maybe I work for Google. I make $250,000 a year. I know it's not everybody, and that's
Sure.
not me for sure, but let's just say that that's me. I want to start maxing out my 401k, which is like 20 grand a year or so. I know it goes up every year, but let's just say that. So let's say I invested 20 grand into my 401k starting at age 30, 35, and I wanted to retire, quote unquote, at 55. What am I looking at there?
Yeah, so for 20 years, and let's just make this a conservative rate of return of 7%, which I think we can probably do better. But so if I'm 35 years old, I'm saving for 20 years, and I'm earning a 7% rate of return, that's $819,909.
God, did anybody else ever figure that one out? This is somebody at 35 years old who hasn't saved a dime. So this is when we say it's never too late. You haven't saved a dime, but if you're in a position where you can now max out your 401k, 20 years of $20,000, that's actually, how much is that just of your own cash you put in? 20 times
20,000?
Yeah, 20,000 a year times 20 years. That's what, 400,000, give or take?
Yeah.
So you put in $400,000 of your own cash over 20 years, and assuming that you get the rate of return of about 7%, which
Call
is
it
about the
7%.
average, you've doubled your money just by sitting it in that account there. Now you're 55 years old with $800,000. Now, is that enough to retire off of? That's a different conversation, depending on how your lifestyle is. But regardless of that, that's $800,000 that you have for your retirement. That's $400,000 more that you didn't have if you weren't able to save that much. So even though you may not start till you're 35, and the reason why I picked that number is because that seems to me, and you tell me if I'm wrong with this, about the age where people generally start to think about long-term, okay, if I haven't saved, I need to really think about saving. What does that look like?
Yeah, and there's another thing that people really need to start thinking about. If somebody's in that situation, they really also need to think about thinking about tax planning. Taxes are huge. So there's something people never talk about. With the 401k plan, everybody's, this is for your retirement. We just did the numbers. If I save for 20 years, earn 7%, there's almost $1 million in that account. Great. But let's not forget that because you saved $20,000 into the 401k plan, you've now gotten a tax deduction. Let's talk about that for a moment. In California, that could be potentially, somewhere between, depending on your tax bracket, right? Call it 25 to 35%, maybe 40%. So that $20,000 could probably mean about a $7,500 tax savings. So now you have $7,500 that you otherwise would have ended up paying in taxes. So what do you do with that extra money? Well, if you invested that, imagine, so now you're not just saving $20,000 a year, maybe you're saving $27,000 a year. So it's important for people to think about tax planning because the more money you could keep in your pocket and not have to pay to the government, with compound interest over time, it's just going to end up benefiting you. So you really have to be aware of the tax benefits that are available to you, not just to help you save taxes today, but how am I going to save taxes along the way? And how am I also going to control my tax bracket when I'm retirement? The big problem sometimes is if I'm a doctor or if I'm making good money and I have this big cush pension, the majority of your income is going to be in 401ks or pensions or things like that. And that's great, but you're going to be paying taxes on everything, right? What if you can create a bucket of money that's going to be available to you tax-free? What if you could, instead of funding the pre-tax 401k plan, you could do a Roth 401k plan? There's things like that. So people should learn about the different programs that are available through their employers. It's not always just this standard 401k plan. Some people could also choose to contribute after-tax money that's going to be available to them tax-free.
That just because you didn't start at 21 or 18, like we tell everybody at a young age, which if you did great, you're probably at a much better position than a lot of us. It's never too late for most of us. And millennials, especially around here, most people are probably making six figures because it's tech. So tech money, most of them are making six figures, and $20,000 on a $100,000 salary means you're putting away. That means you get $80,000, but not necessarily, because you're putting that money tax free. So the government's not taxing you. So you're able to bring that $80,000 lower to be taxed. And again, I bring that up because I'm sure people don't think of it that way. They just think, I'm 35 and I haven't saved a dime, I'm screwed. Really, no. You have an opportunity to make it better, and here's how you can actually look at it. So thank you for bringing that calculator. I'm glad that we're able to get that demonstration out there. People need to be able to see it. They need to be able to see on numbers, oh, I actually do have an opportunity. And what does that look like? What would I do with $1 million? Now, $1 million in 20 years is not going to have the same value as $1 million today, just because of the way that everything goes up. But it's definitely something that you can work with. So, Miguel, this has been an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for all your insight on wealth management and how to plan, and getting the mindset to millennials, especially that these are conversations that can be difficult, but we have to have them, and all is not lost. You can definitely plan for a long future with yourself and your spouse and your kids for whatever you wanted to do. So what's the best way for people to reach out to you if they ever have questions about how this whole thing works, or they want to find out more about you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is a great one. Miguel Delgado, you can find me on LinkedIn. Another way is just to send me an email, mdelgado@peak360wealth.com. Yeah.
All right. I'll put the link in the description for everybody, so you can click on that to reach out to Miguel. And thank you, everybody, for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like the video, subscribe to my channel on YouTube. And if you're listening to this episode on Spotify or Apple, please leave me a comment. This actually helps the algorithm put the podcast out to people who may otherwise have not even known it exists, and it helps the channel grow. So thank you so much for doing that for me. If you would like to make a contribution to help the channel keep going, I do have a Patreon account. And as a thank you, I do give you access to some of the bonus content that I do film with the episode, usually outtakes about what we talk about before and after the show. Thank you, Miguel, for coming out. And everybody, thank you for listening and watching. You have a great day.
Thanks for having me on the show.